Hi gang, on top of today's content there's an opportunity to win a signed Sergio Aguero shirt. Not signed by Sergio Aguero, but signed by Aguero! Martin Tyler. And
I did put a few extra O's on the shirt, so that's for me.
And content-wise, we start off with We Need to Talk About, and it's do managers need time to build a foundation? Now we've got this situation with England and Lee Castley, where there is no foundation time. You lose, you're rubbish. You win, you're the next England manager.
I think it depends on the circumstance. We've got an intriguing three of the best, which represent quite a number of the top clubs. You'll be interested in those.
My young player is Levi Colwill.
Ugo Viana.
I'm sticking with my Chelsea. Is Florent Malouda, and the reason I'm picking him is what a great career he had. And then, of course, Martin Tyler's letter from the Gantry, in which he looks back at the England managers he's commentated on.
The England manager situation. So I thought it was appropriate to share a few memories of covering England over 350 games, a span in all of 15 different England bosses. And the voice of passion, that's Neil, and me, the voice of reason, have a right old ding-dong in that section of this podcast.
Call it! And in the same way, he didn't hold him when the whistle went.
You accept that Moreno let go in time, so it wasn't a foul. So it's not a foul. So
it was touch and go.
But it doesn't. He touched and he went. That's what it was.
No, but the fact is, you're cheating.
You're not cheating.
There used to be giants is a new segment looking back at clubs who were in the top flight and have said goodbye to a lot of us. Oldham Athletic are the first.
Is it the Stoke of the National League?
Yeah.
Who challenged on a wet Tuesday night in Oldham? It possibly is. And we're trying to avoid the thought that we might be in stoppage time. There's stoppage time in the show as well.
The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks rush René! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello, the Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett. It's joyful because on top of the 30,000 plus subscribers, thank you, to our Instagram site, we're now over 10,000 subscribers on our YouTube site. Keep spreading the word. Martin, it's been an active week for you before we get into the detail of our podcast with classic shirts.
Yeah, it's been away day for me, shopping with Ellis, which was a great experience. And I think that's going to be available to watch the whole part, or at least a good chunk of my day. He's very good, by the way, so you don't have to listen to me. The shirts are amazing. And I got a Woking shirt from, I think, the mid-1990s, which I will wear with pride, but not on this podcast. It's like people my age and your age wearing blue denim jeans. It's not on. It's just not on. Privately, I might even do what I know some footballers do, is wear the shirt to have a kip. You know,
I will
pajamas of today.
I will say that at least 10 years ago, Martin instructed me that you get to a point where you shouldn't be wearing jeans. And I think he said it was 40 years old. So
I did. And I still say that to people who are 41, especially with a jacket. You know, it's like mutton and lamb comes to mind.
Yeah. Martin is so sorry, isn't he? So, yes, let's get...
Born in Chester, remember? With Michael Owen and Danny Murphy and Daniel Craig. And so I can have a little bit of them as well in my DNA.
Now, look, you can win a classic shirt. It's an Aguero one, signed by...
Yeah, it's a lovely shirt. And there are complicated ways of winning it, but it's there to be won. And
so, however
you'll love somebody who's with us to win it.
So, however you're watching or listening to this, if you look on the description below, you'll find out how to enter. Okay, let's move on and start with We Need to Talk About. And Martin, we need to talk about whether a manager really does need time to build a team, build a foundation. I want to go back to just a couple of weeks to Arsenal beating Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League. And Luis Enrique said afterwards, well, what do you expect? I've been here 18 months and Mikel Arteta's been there 5 years. And
coming up 5 years, yeah.
And Mikel Arteta's always saying, and Pep's been there 9 years, we've got to catch up.
Jurgen Klopp, was it 8, something like that? Anyway,
and Enzo Maresca is driving me up the wall because every press conference he says, Arteta 5 years, Guardiola 9 years, but he's right. And now we've got this situation with England and Lee Carsley where there is no foundation time. You lose, you're rubbish. You win, you're the next England manager. And before you comment on it, I want to take you back to 1990. And in 1990, USA and Great Britain and a number of other Western countries invaded Iraq. And CNN managed to get in on the invasion and brought us hourly updates of what was going on. And USA had 24-hour news media. Britain didn't. But Britain, on the back of that, developed 24-hour news media. People might not know this, if there are any youngsters out there listening. Radio 5 was only born in 1990 to bring rolling news, and all those news channels only really started in 1992, really, when Sky flowered with getting the Premier League. We didn't have this rolling news before.
Well, we didn't have the technology. That was part of the problem. Yeah, I mean,
but then
now you can do it on your phone.
Yeah, but we didn't just get rolling news. We got rolling sports news. And that means that every minute...
I wonder where you were taking me with this.
That means that every minute has got to be filled with news of how this manager's doing, how that manager's doing, how Lee Carsley's doing. Does a manager need more time than they're given by the media and by their clubs and by their FAs?
Well, you're speaking from a club that doesn't believe in that. Happily dispensing great managers like sacking Carlo Ancelotti, who has certainly not suffered from the experience, and then can continue to win trophies. So I think it depends on the circumstance. Most managers would say, yes, we do need time, we do want to build a team, but now we're talking about coaches who get given the players, so you know, that's a better argument, really, saying, look, it's no good you giving me players that you want and only giving me 6 weeks or 6 months to turn them into a proper team. I think that nowadays that particular head coach role, I think that needs a different approach to being the old-fashioned football manager. I mean, we've gone through periods of huge stability in football with Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger, and before that, you know, the whole Liverpool setup, you know, promoting from within and keeping the continuity going. So it was a foundation as such. Don Revie, I'm going to be talking about England managers actually. He's obviously one of them. At Leeds, being given that time. So there is a lot of evidence of success for doing that kind of thing. But the pressures are different, and I think in the past it was the manager who got the stick. And now it's more higher up. People know the structure of football clubs. So once the directors start getting stick about the way the team's going, the manager's in the firing line. And that's changed a lot, I think, because it's now everybody knows the owners of the football clubs now. And the sporting directors we've talked about enough in this programme. They're another link in this particular chain. Yeah, there comes a time where you realise, I think, looking at a football club and saying, well, actually, it's not going to work under this guy. He might go off somewhere else and do it. It's just been unfortunate circumstances, maybe some bad signings. But it's against the grain of a short-term world we live in to think that this could happen. Enzo Maresca is a very interesting case in point as to how long after Pochettino did pretty well and he wasn't given any time. But that's a difference in philosophy of the club, not football philosophy as such, but with what the club wanted. So, yeah, it's the most vulnerable position, and so getting a foundation is really difficult. But I would support the view that it should be given the very best chance to be created.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that just as we were talking a week or two ago about youngsters having to make their way as a substitute, as an impact player, they don't really get the opportunity to start these days in order to prove themselves. So coaches have to have an instant impact. They're not really allowed to build a team. And yet,
not their team. The club will give them a team, or a squad to develop into a team. But it's less and less their choices, and I think we have to respect that in the whole issue of trying to get something that lasts for longer than half a season.
Yeah, but I think the ones that work, it is their choices, but it's their joint choices with the directors of football. And poor old Eric Ten Hag has been linked with a lot of poor so far purchases that haven't worked out because he had a say whether it was Anthony or the other players from
Ajax,
from Ajax and from the Netherlands.
Well, that's when the sporting directors say, "Well, look, we've given you the chance to pick the players, and it hasn't worked out." But that's probably the one thing you can hold against Eric Ten Hag, who I think is still a fighter and somebody who has got the raw materials to be a very successful coach again. But that's an obstacle if he is going to overcome the obstacles. That's the biggest one.
But the extraordinary one, in many ways, looking back, was Arsene Wenger, because he in his first full season won the League and Cup double. But of course, that Arsenal team had been built by George Graham, really, and left, even though there was a year in between, or 18 months in between. But the point being, he changed the style of football completely with those players and still made it work.
Changed their lifestyles as well, with the dietary and drinking water instead of other things. And generally, but you look, Alec Ferguson built what were we saying? At least three very successful teams. So that's what you can get.
Yeah, but it took him.
The chemistry's right, but that is also a long time ago, Neil.
Yeah, and it took him 6-7 years to win his first league title.
Yeah,
extraordinary. Okay, I think you need a foundation, and I think it's absolutely not by chance that Manchester City and Arsenal at the moment are the two strongest clubs, and Liverpool on the back of Jurgen Klopp, because they've got that foundation, and change hasn't really worked against them.
But there has to be change. That's the problem.
Yes.
The span of a top player. I mean, we marvel at the ones that have gone on for a long time, like Ryan Giggs, James Milner, Gareth Barry, people like that. That's extraordinary, but it's against all the odds. So if you're lucky, you might have one of those in your squad, but mostly you're going to have
you could probably only afford one, because obviously they need to be catered for as they get slower and what have you.
I'm not sure Giggsy got much slower. I don't know. and James Milner, still, I did a game last season where I was absolutely in awe of the way that he conducted
He's nearly
himself
as old as you, isn't he?
Getting that way, yes.
Let's move on to three of the best.
And he makes them pay.
Three of the best. He's made them pay, and that completes a wonderful hat-trick.
Okay. Martin's young player this week is someone who, I don't know if you're aware, but is affecting all commentators.
I didn't know that. In what way?
He is
Mikey Moore.
And I have not heard a commentator. I've seen he's played in youth games and reserve games and goodness knows what against Chelsea, and I've seen a couple of games with England underage groups. He's never ever referred to as Moore. He's always referred to as Mikey Moore. So the ball's going around, rotating around the pitch and through the team.
We love alliteration, don't we? All the commentators love alliteration. Maybe another more playing. Maybe you have to use the Mikey bit to make sure you've got the right more. It's a good name, isn't it? A good name to have in London football. He's at Tottenham. He became Tottenham's youngest Premier League player at the back end of last season. I've got it written down here, 16 years and 277 days. He's only turned 17 in August. He's now on the back of an outstanding pre-season tour. We talk about sometimes these tours being detrimental to football clubs, but they do give opportunities to the youngsters, and
especially after international tournaments.
Yes, and he certainly took that opportunity with both feet, shall we say. He's played the full 90 minutes in the Tottenham's European game recently. He's been used as a substitute in the Premier League, and he's a winger. He's as chirpy as his name suggests on the field. I've not yet met him. I'm looking forward to that. And I think he's very marketable, isn't he?
And he knows where the goal is.
M&M and all that stuff, you know.
He knows where the goal is.
Yeah. And he plays. Best compliment I can pay him from what I've seen. I did watch a lot of the games on tour because I was doing Spurs in their first Premier League game at Leicester. And he's a boy who plays like a man.
My young player is Levi Colwill, who played centre-back at last for England in this international break and cleared one off the line that was heavily reminiscent of what John Terry did for England in, I think it was the Euros in 2012. But the reason I'm picking on Colwill is I've said a lot.
You're not picking on him, you're picking him.
Well, yes. Picking up Cole.
Yeah.
I've said a lot on this podcast from my experience of working within a football club, how most players become what they're going to be by the time they're 21. But the great players really improve again from 21 to 24. And Levi Colwill is 21. And I've got to admit that up until this summer, I wasn't convinced by him. I was convinced he was going to be okay and obviously a good professional footballer. He was never comfortable at left back, where he was being played a lot last season by Chelsea. And he came into the centre of defence this season in a more recognisable back four a lot of the time. And his form has gone like that. This season, it's gone like that.
For the listeners...
Oh, yes, yeah. Thank you. I'm going hand level with shoulder to hand above my bald head. And he has started on a road that I am optimistic will make him one of the best defenders in the country. And I thought for his first England appearance at centre-back rather than left-back, I thought he was really, really convincing. And Levi Colwill, I think, is making that move from, he's going to be okay to he's going to be better than okay. Old player.
Yeah, this is really topical. My old player is Hugo Viana, who was a player at Newcastle as a youngster, very young actually, came quite early in his career, but he's now re-emerged in English football. He is the new top man at Manchester City.
Or will be.
Will be, yes, taking over from Cheeky Begiristain, who is finishing at the end of the season. And that's a very intriguing appointment. One, because his CV stacks up. He was a good enough footballer to play, I think, 29 times for Portugal, but it was spread over about 11 years, so he wasn't a regular. If you didn't see him play left-footed, people have said he's like Mesut Ozil. I think that's a fair comparison, really. He was voted early in his career the Young European Footballer of the Year, so perhaps didn't quite fulfil his potential as a player. But what he's done as a sporting director at Sporting, the club in Lisbon, has been outstanding. And as we speak, they've played 8 games and won them all.
And their record is at home scored 10, conceded 1, 4 games. Away 4 wins, scored 17, conceded 1.
And Ruben Amorim is the coach that he's been fostering, nurturing, whatever you want to say. and it won't be the biggest surprise in the world should Pep Guardiola decide to leave. Should Pep Guardiola be attracted by the England job, or should he decide another career path and leave Manchester City, that Amorim, with the Viana connection, is the one that would now be odds-on favourite to come in. And his record suggests he very nearly came to English football. I think maybe he was linked with Liverpool before Arne Slot was appointed. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. I remember thinking as a player, he was always sub when I was doing the Newcastle games. He didn't see too much of him, but he came with a lot of promise. He was loaned out quite a lot of times when he was on the books of Newcastle. But he could be making a bigger impact on the Premier League from his new position when he settles down. So one to keep an eye on.
Can I just be nitpicky here?
Yes.
A lot of people listening to this will probably think that the club is called Sporting Lisbon.
It's not.
And it's not. And it's actually Sporting Club, CLUBE.
Yes.
And it's of Lisbon, but it's not.
A lot of people, not in Scotland, of course, but around the world, think it's Glasgow Rangers.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not.
Yeah, so it is Sporting Club. They are in Lisbon, but
yes.
that's it. In fact,
I've seen Everton Liverpool as in another hemisphere probably, where because Everton is in Liverpool, they think that's.
But you actually, just as an aside, how many overseas people used to call Manchester United Manchester because they never realised there was a city? Now, of course, it's far too confusing to call them that. But
I thought you were going to say it was the other way around. It's not quite like that yet.
Yeah. My old player is I'm sticking with my Chelsea is Florent Malouda, and the reason I'm picking him is what a great career he had. He played in the 2006 World Cup final and actually won the penalty that Zidane scored that put France ahead. He played in the 2008 and 2012 Champions League finals, losing one, winning one. He won the league in the Premier. He won several French leagues. He was just a top class left winger. But recently, with the Lassana Diarra case and the court cases over transfers and contracts and everything else that is going on, Malouda is a good example of how, however good you are, it doesn't help you if your club doesn't want you. And after the Champions League final in 2012, Chelsea decided they didn't want him. He had 1 year left on his contract, and they just made him go and train in the academy with the under 23s, as I think it then was. And he had a year of not being allowed anywhere near the first team setup. It followed on, actually, the same thing having happened to Nicolas Anelka the year before. And whenever these cases come up, contract cases, I don't think there is always a clarity from the media over where responsibility for breakdown lies. And I just look back on situations like that, and Malouda was a decent guy. He was an approachable, articulate, decent guy. He was up and down as a player, maybe more than towards the end, especially than through the best part of his career. But does anybody deserve treatment like that? And I don't think when these contractual cases come up that football clubs have always served the interests of the people they employ in the way that they should.
Are you talking Jadon Sancho in modern money, so to speak? There are always two sides to every story, and I think part of the problem, and you've touched on it really, Neil, we don't get to hear about it. Maybe it's not our business. I mean, maybe it's intrusive media. I don't know. There will be plenty in the media saying Tyler's talking rubbish here. You know, it's the media's job to push and shove. But there are things in our lives that we regard as private, and maybe that's the way the football club wanted to deal with that. was no social media then. Had there been, I'm sure we would have learned a lot. What, you were there? I mean, don't you know what happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, they just
They just bombed him.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was past his well past his peak, and I don't think he was necessarily worth a place in the team. But to bomb him out and say, no, you're going to go to the other side of the training ground, and you're not going to be allowed in this side, and you're going to be training with the kids. I don't.
There are strict-ish regulations about what clubs can do to senior players. The PFA, I don't know. We're going back a few years now. I don't quite know what was in place then, but certainly you can't be completely
not training with a group.
No, you've got to be with a group, and I think you've got to be in a position where you can play. So most of the overage players are allowed in most of the under 21 leagues, as far as I understand. So but it's a shame, and he got out in the end.
Well, he's retired, and I'm just using that as an example because he did reach a lot of major finals and win a lot of trophies, and I'm not.
He was. I commentated on him a lot, including the 2006 World Cup final, and he was a very good player.
Player.
Yeah, this is an emotive one, really. Vangelis Pavlidis of Benfica and Greece. I mentioned Benfica because I saw him play for Benfica in the Champions League before he pitched up at Wembley and scored the 2 goals against England. He's a new sign. He actually played in Germany and then really made his name in the Netherlands with Willem II and AZ, and moved to Benfica for this season and has hit the ground running there. And they demolished Atletico Madrid, as we talked about in the previous podcast. He was a big part in that as a player. He is an aggressive central striker with a belief in his ability on the ball, but also very good in the air. So we talk about a dearth of central striker. He certainly is one, and a good one. And of course, he was too good for England, who had a bad experimental night, and he took full advantage of it. The other part of it, which makes it emotive, of course, is he led the tributes to poor George Baldock, who anyone who's met him will know what a terrific guy he was, as well as a fine footballer. And to lose his life so young in such seemingly innocent circumstances is a true tragedy. And I thought, obviously the game was the game, but it fell the way of the celebration of George's contribution. I think his grandmother was the Greek connection, but he'd been playing for Greece for a couple of years and obviously known in this country as Sheffield United. And the mixing of the victory with the remembering George was very, very moving, I thought. And Vangelis Pavlidis was right at the heart of that as the scorer of the 2 goals. So special circumstances, but he looks to me like a player that we'll hear more of. He was described, I think quite rightly, that he wasn't the first choice to play in that game, but if you'd had seen him the week before, as I had, just by coincidence, you go, what do you mean? He's a top player. And he was, England he caught England out a couple of times and well played.
And just George Baldock, I mean, I don't think we should look at him and think Sheffield United twice 1 year in the Premier League and got relegated straight away. I thought he was a really good player for them. I thought he was one of the reasons they got promoted. I thought he was a very good player.
Totally appreciated by his teammates, and that was not just said, as sometimes people say when these things happen, these awful things happen. It's absolutely the truth. Completely loved by everybody, and just a proper guy.
My player is Trent Alexander-Arnold. He was played left back by Lee Carsley in the game at Finland. Why? He'd never played left back in his life. I don't.
You just said Levi Colwell can't play left back, and he's in the squad.
Yeah.
So he was probably the next cab off the rank in that sense. But they decided not to go with the way things.
And you said to me right at the beginning, why don't they take
Lewis Hall?
which broke my heart, of course.
Now at Newcastle,
Chelsea got rid of him or let him go or whatever.
I've seen him play a couple of times this season,
and he's doing quite well.
He's doing well. He's very young, but he's
naturally so left-sided,
and he's exuberant.
Yeah, but I just want to say this about Trent. There's so much noise around him from the media, not from him, around him, because there have been so many great right-backs who are English in the Premier League. But Kyle Walker, for me, didn't have quite as good a season last season as previously, and was poor at the Euros and is in his mid-30s. Kieran Trippier is treading on water now getting into his mid-30s. Reece James is never fit. And Trent Alexander-Arnold is the only one of that quartet who is really available to play right back. As a right back at Liverpool, he has won the Champions League, the Premier League, the Club World Cup, the FA Cup, the League Cup. Yes, he's not the best defender in the world. Yes, he probably is the best user of a ball of any right back in the world. Build round that. Build round his qualities. Don't say he's got deficiencies
he's got man of the match
and push him somewhere else.
All three of Lee Carsley's games, so I don't know what you're banging on
because
about.
He's got to play right back for England.
Well, England needed a left back. He scored a goal, and
he scored a goal from a free kick.
You didn't watch it all. Jack Grealish came out at the end and said, "If you stick this in, I'm going to pay you £500." And that's what Trent put it in the top bin, as Jack said, top bins, and those are lovely side issues. About it is. But that's the joy of football.
Yes,
players
I agree,
at international level having a little joust about who's going to take the free kick, and we had no free kicks scored in the whole of the European Championship. I think that's right, no direct free kicks. And there's a player of immense talent to do it. He would have taken it if he'd been playing at right back. We all know.
Yeah, but what I don't understand is why Kyle Walker was played at right back. Why don't play him midfield. I know that was Gareth Southgate. Just play him in his position because.
But he picked the squad. He didn't want to get anybody else in. There's always the problem of the second international. I think Curtis Jones had been called up and he was sent back to his club. They didn't want to take them away. They're looking after everybody.
That's another way that internationals have changed, by the way. Now they crawl to the clubs and they won't play someone for all of 2 games or they it really is.
Trent played pretty much.
Yeah, he did.
Games,
yeah.
So, but listen. I'm only picking holes in this just because that's what we do. But the truth is, he's an enormous talent, and he is a footballer. But going back to somebody I know very well, and went through. And it's not the same position, but Glenn Hoddle was the Trent Alexander-Arnold user of the ball of his generation, and he got 50 caps when his fans say he should have got 150 caps. He was in and out. Was he going to play? Could we build a team around him?
And he mostly played in the 4-4-2 on the right wing.
Yeah,
for England.
It was never really given. And then maybe playing for England, you shouldn't have a team built around you. But England could have done that under the managers that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But that's always been the way with players who have a great talent but a deficiency that's almost as obvious. And where do you play Trent? It didn't work in midfield in the Euros. At right back, he will be vulnerable defensively. So play him wide and play him in a system that England don't really use in front of a right back and let him play as a winger. Well, he's not going to like that because his passing range is restricted. Yeah. So listen, there's very few perfect footballers, none probably, and he's got a quality that is 11 out of 10. And he's got a deficiency that's probably 7 or 8 out of 10. So I'm with the camp that back him to play because his passing range is awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
awe-inspiring. But I was also, because I think I've said on this podcast, I did play one game against Glenn Hoddle when he had to play properly because he was getting ready to play. It was a fitness test game against the team I happened to be playing in. So I saw him on the pitch at first hand. And if I had any doubts about what... I don't think I'm going to see Trent Alexander-Arnold in those circumstances, though I'd give it a go if anybody else, to be honest. But it's breathtaking when you're in that privileged position, as I was for I don't know, he played 75 minutes or something in the game, and different gravy, as they say.
Yeah. Trent needs to be right back until Reece James is fit. Okay. Right. That's three of the best. Coming up, we've still got Voice of Passion and our new segment. There used to be giants. And these are teams that were in the top flight that have gone. But right now, it is Letter from the Gantry by Martin Tyler.
Letter from the Gantry.
Thanks, Neil. Well, it is a hot topic at the moment, the England manager situation. So I thought it was appropriate to share a few memories of covering England for over 350 games, a span in all of 15 different England bosses. I have one rule, incidentally. I never knowingly refer to the Three Lions as we. I've been either working for British broadcasters or Australian TV or world feeds. I was very aware that not every viewer wanted England to win. I've always obeyed the principle that there are two teams in a game and that I should give them equal attention. My first England commentary cap was for ITV in February 1982 at Ninian Park, Cardiff. The home international championship was still in fashion then, and England beat Wales 1-0. The winning goal, some 15 minutes from time, struck home by Trevor Francis, then of Manchester City. The manager was Ron Greenwood, whom I'd first met when I was still playing, thanks to me being a teammate in non-league football of Ron's son, Neil. That didn't help much when I started in television. I was sent to a Wales-England game at Wrexham in 1980. Ron's team lost 4-1 that day, and his prickly response to my post-match questions made it clear that I was the last person he wanted to see. Ron started in the job as a caretaker, or interim as it's called today. So the situation Lee Carsley finds himself in, and Gareth Southgate 8 years earlier, is not a new one. Bobby Robson followed Ron Greenwood. I was in Copenhagen for his first game when a debut win was taken from his grasp by a 21-year-old Jesper Olsen, with one of the best individual goals ever scored against England, but maybe topped 4 years later by Diego Maradona with his second in that World Cup quarter-final for Argentina, but we all know it should have been his first. Bobby was very honest, and after one quite lengthy chat on the phone towards the end of his last tournament, the 1990 World Cup, he admitted that he'd only taken the call because he was told it was a Taylor on the phone, not a Tyler. I'd been mistaken for his successor, Graham Taylor. Graham was the first England manager to allow behind-the-scenes access to television cameras. The content was fascinating, but in the end, it didn't work in his favour. Terry Venables was to the manner born. He didn't like commentators watching training, but treated me to a lesson on his football philosophy, using Subbuteo men on the floor of his sparsely furnished office at the FA headquarters. It was a privilege. Euro 96 should have been his springboard for a long stay in the role, but maybe of his own choice, he landed elsewhere. Glenn Hoddle was another natural. His first match was away to Moldova. England won 3-0, but my greatest memory was that the floodlights were switched off within seconds of the final whistle. Electricity was a very precious commodity for the Moldovans. I finished my summing up from the Gantry in the dark. Kevin Keegan was another outstanding player charged with the job. 63 caps, 31 times captain, 21 goals, accessible to the commentators and the public. At the team hotel at Burnham Beeches, there would always be a long line of autograph hunters. Kevin would sign for everybody, allegedly a reaction to being refused the signature by one of his boyhood heroes at his favourite club, Doncaster Rovers. When England said farewell to the old Wembley, King Kev abdicated. After that Didi Hamann goal for Germany. It was a World Cup qualifier, of course. England won the away leg 5-1 under their first foreign manager, the late Sven-Göran Eriksson. Along with Euro 96 and that 4-1 triumph over the Netherlands, as good an England performance as I've seen holding a microphone. I'd known Sven from his remarkable starting coaching with Gothenburg 20 years earlier. He'd done a lot and won a lot in the intervening period and had sacrificed none of his charm in doing it. The debate over a foreign coach for England has surfaced again. Italian Fabio Capello was also given a crack at making that concept work. But despite strong efforts to integrate and get a better command of our language, he always seemed more of an outsider. The fact remains that all World Cup winners have been managed by a citizen of their own country. The very English Howard Wilkinson, Peter Taylor and Stuart Pearce have all filled in as caretakers. Steve McLaren's short reign ended in the rain one night at Wembley. Sam Allardyce came and went with a 100% record, played 1-1-1. I had the responsibility of describing the action during those ever-changing times. I'd often come across Roy Hodgson as a very successful coach in other countries. For a long time, he seemed the football equivalent of a prophet without honour in his own land. He was 50 by the time he landed his first job at the top level of English club football. He was coming up 65 when England finally called. Gareth Southgate set new standards. That was the biggest test of my impartiality, covering the delayed final of Euro 2020, particularly when Luke Shaw, whom I'd first seen in a primary school fixture when he was a square-shouldered 10-year-old, scored that opening goal. In Berlin back in July, Gareth took England to its first major final outside Wembley, and Luke played again. Getting closer, tantalisingly so. But Lee Carsley was quite entitled to justify his recent controversial lineup against Greece by saying, why not experiment? Nothing won since 1966. But I can assure Lee and all of you that from watching at very close quarters, it hasn't been for the want of trying.
Just one question. In all those 350 games, plus whatever they were, did you ever really believe that you might commentate on an England triumph?
Certainly in Wembley in 2021, yeah, absolutely certain. And when it comes to penalties, of course, you know, it is a toss of a coin. But yeah, I think I did do under-18 tournament when Gary Neville played in the early 1990s, and England won it. It was played in England, and that was good fun. I think the final was at the City Ground at Nottingham Forest. Robbie Fowler played, and people like that. Sol Campbell, I think, and Nicky Butt. David Beckham didn't make the squad. The squad of 16. So I have an England victory on my CV, but I'm a professional broadcaster. I'm an Englishman second now, and I know you've been put in a situation where you have to be objective when you're with Chelsea, and it's difficult, isn't it? But I found it. The thing about commentating for me is I love the contest between the teams. So I'm sort of patting myself on the back by saying I give both teams equal billing, but actually I love doing that. It's not a chore. I want to find out how the opposition tick. I want to be able to respond if something special for them happens, you know. It's just I don't find it difficult. I even did a couple of Woking games, you know, and the only time I think I ever showed any partisan, I hope so, the only time, they won at Millwall as a non-league team. And Clive Walker scored the goal, I think. And I think the 6 seconds I had to say, and it's finished Millwall 0, Woking 1, and I might have been for the next 6 seconds. I might have been quite excited, but it's not difficult. You know, you're doing the job, and having a lovely lifestyle, being involved in football because you love football. I think the love of football comes first, which is why it's fun doing this podcast, and the supporting side of it comes second. And as I mentioned, Luke Shaw there, it is difficult. The more difficult thing is not the teams, it's the people. Mm-hmm. You know, and if you get to know somebody that is doing well or you're commentating on, that's harder to be totally objective about, I think.
Yeah. When I started in this game, I was doing 3 club calls in the old premium phone line things. I was doing Chelsea, QPR and Wimbledon. And when they played each other, not only would the managers phone me up to ask me what the opposition team was, and I would never give it, obviously, even though I knew both. But when I went to the game, even though I was a Chelsea supporter, in the end, I wanted certain players to do well and certain players to do not so well. Obviously, the ones who gave me interviews. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's human, isn't it? Yeah. Right, okay, let's move on. We have come to Voice of Passion.
Voice of Passion.
Which, of course, will be backed up by the voice of reason from Martin. My voice of passion this week comes actually out of... I posted something on Twitter after the Chelsea Nottingham Forest game. Nottingham Forest equalised with what I considered to be a foul. Now, technically, it may well not have been a foul, as a number of people pointed out to me in replies. What happened was there was a free kick correctly for Forest in around the centre circle. It was hit diagonally to the edge of the area. The central defender, who I think you mentioned on the podcast recently, Milenkovic, had pulled out to the Forest left. Noni Madueke, who's a 6'1" winger, marked him. But just before the free kick was taken, Moreno, the left back of Forest, ran forward and grabbed Madueke around the shoulders and the chest and stopped him from marking him. A clear foul. The free kick was taken, free header, and it led to the goal, into the penalty area, and it led to the goal. But as was pointed out to me by a number of people, Moreno let go as the free kick was taken. And it's not a foul to do that before the free kick is taken. So by the letter of the law, perhaps there wasn't a foul committed. Now, I go back a few weeks because I was at West Ham when Chelsea obliterated them 3-0. But West Ham should have had a penalty when Wesley Fofana held back Somerville, their signing from Leeds, their summer signing from Leeds. But VAR said he didn't hold him long enough. Well, he held him long enough for him not to get the ball and for him to go down. And then, in the same weekend, as the Chelsea Forest game, Liverpool won 1-0 at Crystal Palace, and Virgil van Dijk held back Mark Gahey in the penalty area. And again, VAR said it wasn't long enough to affect what was going on. Well, it was. It stopped him getting the ball, and that is long enough. And it is not this pernickety... we will define what a foul is and define what a foul isn't. It is serving justice. And the rigid laws that are being recomposed every week as to their definition, we don't need that. We just need justice. West Ham should have had a penalty against my Chelsea. Crystal Palace should have had a penalty against Liverpool. And the goal of Nottingham Forest should have been disallowed because... if you're cheating, you're friggin' cheating.
I couldn't disagree with you more, to be honest. You're trying to have a one-size-fits-all application of the laws. Every situation...
Justice. I want justice.
It's not justice, it's judgment. It's not the same thing.
I know. That's what I'm complaining about.
Well, every situation that's ever happened in a football match that you want to talk about or we've watched, and we've watched a lot down the years, is different. There are never two the same.
Yeah, so
it's different time of the game, different players, different part of the pitch, different type of contact, and a different era perhaps of the officiating. Every decision should be judged on its merit by the people who are in judgment that day. I have no experience of this, I must stress this at the start, but if you go to court and they tell you there's a tough judge, and be careful if you're charged with some petty offence and you've got a tough judge, you're going to get something serious. That's the way it is. That's the judgment. And the judgment of the referees and VAR on the day is peculiar to that set of circumstances. I saw at Everton against Newcastle, Tarkowski penalised for hanging on, maybe for a longer period, a VAR penalty that nobody picked out from the crowd. Nobody was really appealing. There was a shot that sailed into the Gladys Street end, but VAR found it and called it a penalty. That was that decision at that moment by that official at that time. You cannot standardise these things. They are all different. So it's the call on the day. And it's not, oh, he held on too long or he didn't do this. There will be some consistency because the referees are trying to do that. But the truth is, you call it as you see it, and that will never change. Because if we start to put that in an envelope, that comes in under that category.
No, I'm sorry. I can't have that, because the new thing with VAR is that they're saying, oh, he didn't hold him for long enough to have any effect. He held him. He's cheating. Call it. And in the same way, he didn't hold him when the whistle went.
You accept that Moreno let go in time, so it wasn't a foul. So it's not a foul. So
it was touch and go.
But it doesn't. He touched and he went. That's what it was.
No, but the fact is, you're cheating.
You're not cheating. You can't play. You watch. I don't know anything about it, so forgive me if I tread on toes here. But I believe that basketball is supposed to be a non-contact sport. I've seen it and watched clips of it. It's totally contact. Yeah. But the laws say it isn't. And yet there are certain things allowed. There are certain things allowed in football, and you cannot define those moments. You can have a sort of overview at it. But there will be referees who are saying, well, I don't know how long holding should be or not, because I'm going to call it and what I see at that moment. And if you want, honestly, this is a free flowing game where, of course, we have debate about whether it should be.
There's too much cheating, and it was cheating.
That is, if you think that's cheating, what about players falling over because they think they've been grabbed and making the most of something?
I agree.
Well, how are you going to define that? Where are you going to say? Did he get? Well, he did hold him for a little bit, but then he's plunged to the ground, or he's fallen backwards when you can only fall forwards, and these are just. These are subjective things, and thank God I don't support a team that's on television every week, because I wouldn't sleep if I was like you, thinking about Chelsea. I mean, with Woking we are on television sometimes, but you learn to accept that some days it's your day and some days it's not. There was a big incident. I was at Woking on the FA Cup fourth qualifying round game on Saturday, and there was a major incident at the end which led to the opposing manager being yellow carded on the field and then substituting himself, and then being in the same incident while he was on the bench still going on, and he got another yellow and was sent off. And you can look at it from two ways. So it is what it is. You have to take it. You can't be bitter about it. Oh, goodness me.
If he was yellow carded the second time as a manager, does he get a suspension?
Yeah, of course he does. Yeah.
As a player?
Well, that's a good question. Whether it will be the second one was as a manager, so he may get a suspension from the bench. So I don't know.
Too many rules and not enough justice.
The FA Cup, it's competition specific, and they're out, so it won't matter.
He says with joy. Right.
Yeah, the draw's today, by the way. So we'll have to see what happens.
And just to get this in perspective,
we disagree. That's the perspective.
The perspective, I'm right and he's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go on to our news segment.
You know I'm a reasonable person, so you know I'm right. So
let's go on to our news segment, which is They Used to Be Giants. And this is number one. Oldham Athletic.
Yeah.
Oldham Athletic were in the top flight of English football for 3 years, 1991 to 1994, which of course encompassed the.
They were. You
before that,
Premier League again. The football did exist before
the Premier League. Yeah.
I think it was 1910 to 1923.
Yeah, but I'm talking about in the lifetime of people who are probably listening to this.
Yeah, but there will be Oldham fans who want me to say the right thing about them.
Fair enough.
And they got to an FA Cup semi-final in that period as well.
1913.
Yeah.
But we're concentrating on from 1990 itself, before they won promotion. They got to the League Cup final, which they were runners-up to Nottingham Forest. They got the promotion in 91, but also in 90, they got to an FA Cup semi-final. I mean, they were really becoming a very important
games.
team.
Yeah, they were very good games. They were somewhat overshadowed by the fact it was the same weekend, their first game was the same weekend as Alan Pardew's famous winner for Crystal Palace in the 4-3 against Liverpool, which was the real shock of the day. But they were very close They gave Manchester United a really tough game. And
drew 3-3.
3-3.
Yeah. And it went to a replay. And in 94, they got to another semi-final, got Manchester United again. It was 3-3 again and went to another replay. And in that 3-3, Mark Hughes equalised with a world-class volley in the last minute of extra time. I mean, a phenomenal moment because Oldham were getting to the final. So 2 semi-final FA Cup semi-finals.
Joe Royle, we should mention.
League Cup one. He was manager from 1982 to 1994. They got relegated, but got to semi-final. And as you said to me earlier, before we came on here, he left of his own volition to go and manage Everton.
Where he played, of course, with Grasshoppers. Everybody understood why Joe wanted to go there.
Oldham fell out of the top flight in 1994. They went down to the second tier. They fell out of that in 1997. They went down to the third tier and fell out of that. They got to 2 playoffs, but they were in the third tier for over 20 years. And they fell out of that in... I'm not quite sure where they fell out of that. 2018, and then they fell out of the Football League in 2022, and are now the only team who has played in the Premier League who is not in the Football League or Premier League. In their 2 years in the National League, they came 12th and 10th. They're currently 6th. But what happened to them in the meantime was...
Well, boardroom mismanagement, financial limitations... it's quite a fall, but of course they're not the only team. I mean, the reason they didn't get promoted in the automatic promotion positions in the 2 years they've been in the National League and were Wrexham, who are bankrolled by Hollywood, and Chesterfield, who have a ground worthy of certainly the Championship and their new ground. And other Notts County went up with Wrexham, a team with greater history than Oldham. And to be fair, Bromley, who are very much a non-league team, were the other team in the 2 years, so 4 teams have gone up. So it's tough for them. And now they're having a Mickey Mellons, the manager, who's very experienced in the lower levels of management and is a driving force. They've got a player that we gave a trial to at Hampton and Richmond, which sort of haunts us a little bit. Mike Fondop, who's a bit of a cult figure there, and we played a trial game for us. I can see it now. On a ground, not our ground, by the airport, and he was slightly put off by the planes coming very low. He did all right. He scored a goal in that game, but for some reason we didn't take him. And I've watched him. He scored against Woking, and he's doing very well. He's 30 now, I think. He's a really interesting guy. So they've got I think now in place. The royal family is represented, of course, by the chief executive now, Joe's son. So there's a real feeling of the past, the good times coming back, but it's not easy.
No, and I mean they had for all this century they have had financial troubles and owners that have maybe not represented them in the way that they should.
No, I think to be fair to the owners, they did that. They tried. Like you, we've done a bit of research on this. They really tried to make it work, but their ideas weren't compatible to either the financial backing that they needed, or maybe they were misguided in their philosophy of how to run a football club. But they find themselves where they are. They're alive and healthy in the sense that they've got a feeling of new vigour about the club, and maybe it's their turn. But there's a lot of competition. Obviously, I've coached in the National League, and it is really tough. Full-time, you're coming across international players, players who've played in the Premier League, players who go on to play in the Premier League. It should be regarded really as the fifth division. I suppose it is in some ways, but I think it should have a bit more status than, this is non-league football. I mean, it is league football, National League football.
And it's full-time mostly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's just go back to them in the top flight and get into finals, a final and semi-finals. The player that really I didn't like at all was Rick Holden.
The joy of football.
Rick Holden, the left winger.
You didn't like him for good reasons.
I always thought he was slightly overweight, and every time Oldham played Chelsea, he destroyed us. He had ball ability, he had strength, he had a turn of pace. He just destroyed us. He was a really good footballer.
Well, yeah, I'm not disagreeing. He might have been part of the plastic pitch era as well. I'm not sure about that, because that was something that came and went. I think many people were very grateful that went. Obviously, there was Luton, there was QPR, and there was Oldham. And Preston, I think, for a little while as well.
They had some other good players. Andy Ritchie, who of course had been at Manchester.
Who managed them later on as well.
Yeah, and he was an
Roger Palmer. He was a fine player as well.
Yeah. And they had a lot of players who went on to greater things, didn't they? Who were very successful, but their ground is the second highest ground in the country after West Bromwich Albion. And it's always cold, and it's always raining, and it's always...
when you're born in Chester, you don't worry about that, but you soft southerners...
It can be a very difficult place to go.
Is it the Stoke of the National League?
Yeah.
They were challenged on a wet Tuesday night in Oldham. It possibly is. And they weren't when I left Woking in 2022, so that was the season that they got relegated. So I've been to Wrexham with Woking. I've been to Chesterfield. We won at Chesterfield. We won at Notts County. But we never had the chance. And for me, my two worlds, having commentated Chesterfield in an FA Cup semi-final, Wrexham when they were doing much, much better than they had been then, and the Hollywood boys had just come in. And Notts County, when I heard, I wasn't at the final game where Woking won promotion at in the playoff final. I was working and it was the day Manchester City won the league at Brighton. And Gary Neville, who I was working with, I said, absolutely no, I must not know anything about what's happening at Woking during this game. It's far too important, my job. But at the end, when we finished and we were waiting for the presentation, there was a bit of a gap while the studio took over. He just showed me on his phone the cards, as Woking's nickname, the cards promoted. And I said to him, I can't use the exact words, but in the middle of it was, we're going to play Notts County. And that meant so much to an old fella like me, the history of that. And we did, and we won 4-1. And Michael Doyle was assistant manager of Notts County then, and he's the Woking manager now. So occasionally, when I'm very brave, I do mention it. But we were quite lucky. We scored 4 in the last 15 minutes, and they were 1-0 up for a long time in the game. So those sort of things, the connection of it, and I hope Oldham, they have a reputation.
Do you have a game you commentated on at Oldham that you remember, or with Oldham?
I worked for Granada Television, and I did a couple of Oldham games then. No, in the Premier League, it was the semi-final. It was the obviously not in the Premier League, but in the FA Cup, it was the 3-3 was, and Manchester United had sort of unveiled Mark Robbins by then to get to that semi-final through the win at Nottingham Forest, and he was it was an impact. I think he was a sub. It was a wonderful game, and we thought that would be the big story. And then the later kickoff was at Villa Park, where Crystal Palace.
I think they had players like Paul Warhurst and people like that in Oldham.
I remember Roger Palmer. I think he got the goal to make it 3-3. But it was Ian Marshall, who was the centre half, stroke centre forward. Paul Gerrard in goal. He was very good. So, but Joe Royle was just a diamond of a person. I'll tell you a story about Joe Royle. I hope I haven't mentioned it before. You can cut it out if I have. I went to see Manchester City train just morning. I got a Manchester City game coming up when I was working for Yorkshire Television. So it was the late 1970s. And I coming across from Leeds, my car started to develop clutch problems. So I lurched to the city, the main road as it was then. They were training out the ground. And afterwards, I got invited in for a meal with the players, which was really nice of them. And they said, "Oh, where you going?" I said, "I'm going back to Leeds, but I'll be struggling to get there, to be honest with you. My car's in a bit of a mess." And Joe said, he living on Merseyside still, he said, "Well, I'll follow me up to the point, or I'll follow you up to the point where I turn off left and you go right." So he goes left to Merseyside, I go right out of Manchester, I go right to Leeds. And he did that. And unfortunately, there's not a happy ending to the story, because he went off and I was still going. He tooted and we waved goodbye. It was a lovely thing for him to do. It's somebody I only met a couple of times. I got about another 2 junctions and it conked out completely. So I didn't get back to base, but I'll never forget that. It was a totally unprompted gesture of kindness. So it's nice to talk about Joe in the podcast.
I've seen Joe Royle at Everton reserve games away at Chelsea, supporting his team and just supporting his club and just being top bloke and loving the joy of football.
I know we say this quite often about people, but football is full of really people who understand that it's a team effort. That the ethics of football I've always reflect in life. You know, you need to work as a team. You're strong as your weakest link, and so the values you get from team involvement. And we're a team here doing the podcast. It's special, and it creates special kind of people.
That's a good note to end on. That is the Joy of Football podcast this week, except for stoppage time.
Stoppage time.
Let's just go back to England, and I just want to go to your coverage of England. How much did it change for you from the beginning to the end in terms
it's
of...
not the end, hopefully. It's still available.
Yes,
at
but
the moment, yeah, you're only... I was lucky that the companies that I worked for had the England rights for a long period.
But in terms of, not just in terms of access, but in terms of how England tried to welcome or control or keep away the media, how much did it change your work?
It depended on who was in charge, really. I mean, one of the best things I went to was Gareth Southgate, I guess maybe before the 2018 World Cup. He put on a session at St George's Park where all the squad went into a media room. It was probably a gymnasium or something like that. And everyone had a table or a chair or whatever, so you could speak to everybody. And it was really against the grain, because the feeling is that you'd only speak to, I think Raheem Sterling was one of the headliners at the time. You'd only speak to Raheem, and all the others be sitting around, not getting a mention. But it was just the opposite. It was fantastic, and the players loved it. In fact, there was a digital clock on the roof, up on the ceiling rather, telling us the countdown. Oh my, we've got 12 minutes left. We better get over there and speak to Phil Jones or someone like that. You know, get everything, and they stayed. A lot of the sort of hooter went off, to use a rugby league parlance, and so they could go, but quite a lot of them stayed longer. So I thought that was terrific, and that's quite recent. I would support that kind. I don't think anybody felt left out about it. You know, if you're the third goalkeeper in the group, is anyone going to want to talk to you? Well, they might want. You know, you could play for a club, so other questions. It was really open house. And at the beginning, it probably wasn't like that. It probably wasn't as open as you think. I mean, the first thing the manager I ever met was Sir Alf, who was very difficult. If you read the accounts from the journalists at the time in the '66 World Cup, he wasn't somebody who would bare his soul to the media. And you got what you got, you know. And I think after England won the World Cup, he was supposed to have said England won the World Cup. And he was supposed to have said that they wanted to speak to him the next day. And he said, gentlemen, this is my day off. I think they got him in the end. But, you know, his first reaction was no.
I don't think he used the word gentleman privately. And just technically on
it was only gentleman then. Of course, we wouldn't be saying that now.
Technically, particularly when we were with Sky, were your co-commentators always English?
No, Andy Gray did some games.
He did.
Yeah. I think in the end he felt it was not. But the point I made, that's British Sky Broadcasting.
Yeah.
So we didn't have a problem doing it. I was not batting for England and him batting for the opposition. We loved the game, and You talked about your experience with Club Call, knowing and getting to. You didn't always get the lineups, but sometimes you did. So you were actually in possession of privileged information. I remember doing a Man United Liverpool game once, and thinking I'm probably the only person in the ground who knows both teams the night before. So turning up at the ground the next day, and of course massive responsibility with the secrecy of it. And to see that, then you know that they're trying to do this and they're trying to do that. To me, that's the whole essence of the joy of football. You know, it is the people make it wonderfully warm and welcoming most of the time. The fans are fantastically passionate, but the actual contest between two teams, and that's why it's a bit different now, because it is 16 against 16 now, instead of 11 against 11. And so you might be able to research the starting lineups, but then you have to do that extra work. So if he brings him on, if you're going to take him off, well, that's a surprise he's brought him on to do that. So it's a game within a game now, and that keeps you on your toes, that's for sure.
England more accessible. Well, we knew that because it wasn't a happy relationship between country and media for a long time.
No, there were some were happy with it. Glenn Hoddle was very tight-lipped about it. He was entitled to do that. It was the same in club football. It wasn't anything new. We weren't surprised. Glenn used to say, "That's for me to know and you to find out." And then he was entitled to that. I love him to bits. So, as I say, I do Q&As sometimes with him now, and he's a really good guy. So you go with whatever you can get. Some countries, Brazil always used to announce their team the day before, and that was wonderful.
They stopped doing that when they stopped winning.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, and sometimes Italy would do the same. They were very confident in their lineups, and so you'd be grateful for. Then you sometimes realise, the team that was in the paper this morning actually isn't the team on the team sheet. But so there was a bit of kidology going on. But I hope to do more England games. I really, it's just a question of being at the right broadcaster at the right time, and it's very much on terrestrial television these days. So it's been a responsibility, I think, as well, because you are aware that. But I tried to avoid writing the headlines the next day, even though you knew what they were going to be in the commentary. My job is to describe the action and give the right information, and let those who analyse it, even during a game, you have a co-commentator analysing it, but those who are going to, if you like, give it the context that we're talking about. We know what we're talking about, don't we? That those headlines, the nuances, the preconceived ideas or whatever, that's for another day, or maybe for later that day, but it's not. I never felt that was my job to do that.
Fascinating. Martin Tyler, greatest commentator in the world. From Martin and me.
Hey, see you next time.
Try. Another episode done and dusted. Don't forget the Aguero shirt, which the explanations are down in the description. Don't forget there is a Patreon for you to get involved in. Don't forget our substack.com site where you can read Martin's letters and my thoughts on food.
And the speeding charge.
Oh, dear. Somebody did contact me who read one of the pieces last week, who knows me, and said, "You're obsessed with food." And I said, "At least it keeps me alive. Chelsea kills me."